Realtor.com just reported over 1 million homes are for sale across the country. That's the most inventory we've seen since late 2019. But here in Portland, it's just not that simple. We're starting to see the market changing. We're starting to see inventory levels climb, buyer activity starting to wane, and we're just starting to feel like things are getting a little shifty around here. In today's video, we're going to be comparing things to now versus the year of 2019 when things seemed a little more balanced. We're also going to be taking a dive into some of the suburbs around the Portland area so you can get an idea of what's happening in activity around the Portland metro area. I'm Stewart. I've been a real estate broker in the Portland area for over 24 years with over 95-star reviews. I've helped hundreds of people relocate to the Portland metro area over the years. And whether you're a buyer or a seller, stick around because we're going to be taking a closer look in the Portland area and what's happening in 2025. Surprise, we're no longer in a red-hot seller's market. Was that just COVID, or are things actually shifting right now? You know, the headline news is going to have you believing that there's a huge market crash, an impending doom of sorts in the real estate market. But what I want to share with you is that it's very much like a weather report when you start hearing headline news. They're going to say it's 85 degrees all across America. And we know darn well it's not 85 degrees. Some areas are 70, some areas are 65, some areas are 110. So what is Portland? Well, we kind of have to go backwards and take a look at 2019, before COVID, when there was a little bit more of what we consider a balanced market or a realistic market. So the best thing we can do is start comparing and contrasting first, and then we'll dive into the numbers for different locations around Portland so you can kind of see what's happening with activity and what areas may be a buyer's market and what areas actually still might be a seller's market. Let's start with the obvious one, which is interest rates. What were interest rates in 2019? The average interest rate in 2019 was 4.25%. And what is the interest rate in 2025? Well, as of May, the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac data shows that we've been hovering between 6.8%. We've hit a few 7% here and there, but we're really in the mid to high 8s on average for 2025. That is a significant difference year 2019 to year 2025. It's right away you can see that interest rates were extremely low in 2019. Now, something I want to preface about this, because as you might know, I've been a broker for over 20 years here in Portland. I've seen a lot of different markets and a lot of different interest rates. And in 2019, I can recall having conversations with colleagues about the fact that we have been on a streak of low interest rates for almost over a decade. See, when we went through the 2008 to 2012 recession, we dropped those interest rates really low to help get out of it. Well, we stayed in a pattern of very low interest rates for over a decade. We got really used to those low interest rates. In fact, I really remember having a lot of conversations with people like, golly, what would it look like if interest rates ever went back up to 5.5, 6, and here we are today at the mid to high 6% range. And everything's a bit different in the pricing world, right? So we are really seeing a vastly different market. Now, coming out of COVID, when things were red hot, they dropped those interest rates to extremely low. I know of people who got 2.5% interest rates locked in. Money was virtually free, and the market was red hot. Money was cheap. Money was easy to come by. You could afford a lot for your money. But when everything shifted in 2022, right about mid-2022, we started to see the feds raise the rates. Initially, it went up into the 5s, which was kind of a shock to the system. And then it slowly migrated up until where we're at today. But money is costing us more, and so is prices. So how is that reflected in the 2019 data to now? All right, let's look at another data point from 2019 to 2025. In 2019, we had an average monthly inventory rate of 2.1 months of inventory. In 2025, the recent data pulled from May of 2025 was 3.3 months of inventory. That's over 1.2 months of inventory higher than 2019. What does months of inventory mean? It means that if we put no more homes on the market, in theory, we would sell out based on the absorption of houses. We would sell out in 3.3 months of inventory. Now, I want to share with you something that 3.3 months of inventory inventory, while higher than the 2.1 months of inventory of 2019, is still considered fairly low, meaning they oftentimes say that a buyer's market doesn't start until you hit 6 months of inventory. Once you hit that 6 months of inventory, then you start seeing the shifting sands where buyers have a lot more leverage, houses stay on the market longer, and you start seeing the playbooks be a little bit more in favor of the buyers. The average sales prices were obviously much lower in 2019 versus where they're at today. In fact, they were hovering around the $457 marker, $457,000. Can you even imagine? Trying to find a halfway decent house in the 450s now it feels almost impossible unless you're buying a very tiny house or a poor location or something that needs a lot of work. But relatively speaking, today's market, the average sales price in 2025 is hovering right around that $557 marker, with as high of a median as $612,000. So we've gone up well over $100,000. I will say in the last year, we've come down a bit for the average sales price. A lot of that has to do with people are just tapping out. Incomes are not rising as fast as prices are getting driven up. We've dealt with inflation. There's a lot going on that's keeping the buying public from pushing those prices up like they were in COVID. So right away, we're looking at interest rates were 4.25%. The average sales price was in the mid-50s. And now we're up over $100,000 from that and well over 1% higher in interest rates. Those two things contribute to a softening market. All right, so now we've compared 2019 to 2025. We know that interest rates were a lot lower in 2019. We know that the market was in mostly a seller's market with only 2.1 months of inventory on average. And we know that the sales prices were a lot less. So what does that look like now in 2025 in different parts of Portland? Is it still a seller's market? Is it turning into a buyer's market? Well, the number one thing we can look at is the data. I like to say that I'm a data-driven agent. I like to look at the numbers and analyze. I do know from experience this year, we can tell you that there are certain parts of Portland that are very much still a seller's market where we're seeing multiple offers, where we're seeing a lot of activity from buyers. And then there's areas, you guys, that are just literally dead. Like price reductions are happening, long days on market are happening, and it is a buyer's market in those areas. So let's dive into some data, some areas of Portland. I want to share with you what's happening in different suburbs or areas that you can kind of analyze. Is it a buyer's market? Is it a seller's market? What's going on out there? So let's take a look. All right, the first area we're going to analyze in the Portland Metro is Southwest Portland. And I'm going to specifically say the zip code 97219. And that is the Southwest area. It covers a lot of the Southwest Portland area, although there are other zip codes in Southwest Portland, but this one primarily is the one we're going to focus on. And the median list price is sitting at $700,000, with the median price of a new listing at $785,000. The average days on market is hovering right around 85 days, but the median days on market is only at 35. So that kind of tells you that, the market's actually not too bad for a lot of houses. Now, this is the big number we always focus on, is how many homes have had price reductions in the last week. And you can see here it's about 46%. That's almost half the homes sitting on market are having a price reduction. But does that really tell us that we're in or heading into a buyer's market? Well, when you look at the inventory and the market action, it actually sits at around 44, which means that it has a slight seller's advantage. So if the market were to, say, lower its interest rates, you would actually see Southwest Portland start to turn back into a little bit more of a hotter seller's market. Now, historically speaking, Southwest Portland is always a great market because as you get closer to downtown, it's a rule of thumb, you tend to see the market speed up a little bit in those areas. People like to be close in, they like to be close to things. Southwest Portland has a lot of neighborhood choices and price points, and it encumbrances everything from, close in small bungalows to, some of the bigger properties and neighborhoods. It's very eclectic in Southwest Portland, as you might know. But generally speaking, we're seeing Southwest Portland not in a buyer's market at this time and could even be leaning still towards a seller's market depending on inventory. Valley. So as of right now, Southwest Portland is sitting in a slight seller's advantage. Of course, my rule of thumb is always that if a house has been sitting on the market over 30 days with no price reductions, it's probably due for a price reduction, or they might be more negotiable in their offer. So stay tuned for that. The next suburb will be on the east side we're going to take a look at, and it's Happy Valley. What's happening in Happy Valley? Well, as you can see, the average sales price, the median list price is at $799, and the median price of new homes sits at $765. So what's the median days on market? It sits at right around 70. Now let's look at the price reductions. How many homes in the last week have had price reductions? And it actually sits at 48%. Again, it's higher than Southwest Portland by a couple points, pushing that 50%. That's something to watch as a pattern as we look at all the areas I'm going to be pointing out. But you can see that Happy Valley is having some softening in their prices as they continue to go up there in the price reductions, but the market action is sitting at 30. So it's actually indicating that it's still in technically a seller's market. Prices have flatlined according to the data, and we can kind of watch this one depending on what happens with this year's market. If interest rates go down, obviously that speeds things up. If they don't have any changes, which a lot of people are predicting, our interest rates are going to stay relatively the same, then you can kind of see Happy Valley, in my opinion, sort of flatlining. Nothing going up, nothing dramatically coming down. Obviously, there's going to be those houses and those price points where sometimes the inventory just requires them to have price reductions because there's not enough buyer activity. But in general, it looks like Happy Valley is sitting in a seller's market slightly. The next area of town we're going to take a look at is West Linn, Oregon. West Linn, Oregon, we've done videos on. It's a bedroom community. If you have questions about any of these neighborhoods, by the way, drop us a message or give us a call at the number listed below as we can walk you through a little more detail. Because one of the things I want to bring up is that all these areas, while I'm talking generally speaking, depending on the price range, depending on the location within these areas and neighborhoods, it really does make a difference. There are some areas where the general consensus of that area will be a seller's market, but in certain price points, it's actually considered a buyer's market. So it's very microeconomics when we get down to brass tacks. But anyway, I digress. Let's talk about West Linn. What's happening in West Linn? Well, the median list price is sitting right under $1 million at $999,990. Right under that lip. And the median price of new listings coming on market sits around $900,000. And the average days on market's not really that bad. It's about 42 days, with the average price decreases, get this, at 49%. So they're having the highest out of the three we've talked about so far. They're right under that 50%, meaning that in the last week, 50% or 49% of homes have had a price reduction. Now, it's sitting at a market action of about 38, and because the inventory has been low, it's been keeping things moving. So what we look for is how long homes have been sitting on the market, because the stagnation effect will really play into the price reductions. In this case, the average days on market's anywhere from 72 to 42 days, depending on the data. So again, it's not crazy high. It's in line with the other two areas we've kind of talked about. But you can also just prepare that as we move through the summer, sometimes our market slows down a little bit, especially in the June timeframe, which is at the time I'm making this video. So it's yet to be seen how the rest of this year is going to play out. But as of right now, prices aren't moving higher in West Linn. They're not drastically coming down, other than the ones sitting on the market are getting price reductions. But again, keep a lookout for some of the inventory that does stagnate, because that can play into the numbers as we move through the year. All right, now we're gonna go to a little bit of the outskirts around the west side, and we're gonna talk about an area called Forest Grove, Oregon. Now, Forest Grove sits outside of Hillsboro and Cornelius. It's a little further out, and the reason why I bring it up is because a lot of times the outer areas of Portland experience the cooling happening faster than the inside areas. As we looked at Southwest Portland, you can tell it still feels very much like it's selling, it's moving, things are happening. Now we're looking at Forest Grove. It's a little bit further out, and it also relies a lot on big tech company. As you may or may not know, our local Intel, our beloved Intel, which employs most of the employees in the Portland metro area, or I should say our largest employer, it's been having its struggles. It's had layoffs last year. It's due to have some more layoffs this year in the next coming month. And a lot of us are watching how that plays into the area, specifically around Intel. A lot of employees that work at Intel choose Forest Grove. You get a lot more bang for your buck. It's close in. You don't have to get on any major freeways. It's a little bit more of like a farm community, although they do have a university in it. So what's happening in Forest Grove? There's actually been a lot of new construction over the last year. Well, it's starting to show signs of cooling. Now, it's still considered what they call in a seller's market. And a lot of the data points kind of are still reflecting that some of these areas are in a slight seller's market. But when you kind of dive into some of the numbers or the inventory or even the pricing, you start to see that some stuff is really starting to kind of cool a bit. The median list price is right around $619.9, with the median new listing prices right around $557. So in generally speaking, it's one of the more affordable areas on the west side. The median days on market's 42, not terrible, with the average days on market being around 76. Now, price reductions are 37%. They're not as high as I would have expected. Knowing what I know about Forest Grove and kind of the cooling that's happening out there, and some of the builders who are really excited about moving their inventory, and they're really pushing us agents to come out, show their listings, get them sold. They're offering a lot of incentives, and I've noticed a lot of buyer activity dwindling in those areas, and I can sense that there's some shift happening in there. And sometimes the data that we're reporting doesn't always catch up sometimes with what we start to see out in the field right away. So while I'm sharing with you data that is right now real-time information in these Altos reports for the different areas, especially the market action report data that I gave you earlier, that's always a month behind because they don't deliver that information till they get it all, till the month closes out, and then we're almost halfway through the new month. And also June is one of those months, as I'm reporting this information, where a lot of stuff slows down in general because we have graduation, school gets out, people take vacations. So June's always an interesting month to track, and then getting back into the real summer months like July, when we can really start to see how the summer is going to play out. But you can see that we're still considered slightly in a seller's advantage for Forest Grove. I would say just by looking at these numbers, you're probably going to feel like, hey, it seems like it's doing okay. But it is cooling off in Forest Grove, and just talking to colleagues and buyers and knowing kind of what's happening out here, that's one of those areas that'll be the first to really cool off fast when things slow down, if they slow down. Again, we're doing a lot of looking at the data while looking at what's happening in the market and the economy. I will say that one thing that's holding Forest Grove in a good place is its affordability. And I will say that in most areas of Portland, affordability is the name of the game. The higher the sales prices, the buyer activity goes way, way down. So for example, $750,000 to about $1 million is where it's a move-up buyer range typically. Somebody has to sell something and release their equity in order to get to the next house. And some people just can't afford to make 2 payments, so they'll a lot of times try to sell their house before going to buy the next. If they can't get their house sold, then they're not moving up. So that buyer activity tends to be in that $750,000 to $1 million price point, tends to rely a lot on the lower levels. So just a heads up on that. All right, the next area is Lake Oswego, Oregon. Now, everybody wants to move to Lake Oswego, but it's starting to show signs of cooling. Let's check out the data. So yes, it's in a slight buyer's advantage. This is the first area we've talked about where I can actually say it says a slight buyer's advantage. And I can tell you that in talking to some of my colleagues who know and work heavily in Lake Oswego, a lot of them are starting to share that upper end, that price pressure on those higher end homes is starting to come way, way down. In fact, I just spoke to a colleague this week that said he's noticing on some of the multi-million-dollar prices, they are getting million-dollar price reductions. So let's take a look at some of this data. The median list price sits at just over $1.4 million in Lake Oswego, with the median price of new listings sitting at just over $1 million at $1,095,000. Now, days on market isn't terrible. We're sitting at 42 days on market for the median and 87 days for the average. Now, that's actually a little higher than some of the areas we've been looking at. Now, everybody wants to move to Lake Oswego, so why is their numbers not as excitable as some of the other neighborhoods we've been looking at? Again, going back to affordability, you guys. Just remember, it's always about affordability. When markets start to cool, interest rates are high, people still continue to buy in affordable areas where their dollar gets them more. And unfortunately with Lake Oswego, like we've shared in a lot of our other videos, Lake Oswego struggles with being a great place to live at a very high cost, and not everybody can afford it. And I think a lot of times too, people who can afford it are sometimes reserved. They're a little bit more, they don't have to buy. They can wait to see what happens. When that starts to happen, you'll start to see more and more price reductions, especially at the top level, and that's what's happening here. The market action is sitting at a 28 right now, and it is a slight buyer's advantage. I would say in certain price points in Lake Oswego, it is for sure a buyer's advantage. There are some deals to be had. In fact, there are some listings on the market where the owners bought in the last 2 years. There are some multi-million-dollar properties there that they have taken price reductions in the $1 million range. So it's not as hot as it was a couple years ago, and those people who don't want to keep that house and sell it, they're now starting to really relinquish a lot of the equity that they put into those homes. The market's been cooling, there's more homes are available, and the demand is less. So this market action report we're looking at, you guys, is starting to say that Lake Oswego in all its glory is starting to cool off. And my guess is it has to do with affordability, pricing. It's something to watch. Let's keep an eye on Lake Oswego. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the coming months. Let's go to the next neighborhood on the east side this time, and it's the beloved Sellwood Moreland area. Now, this one kind of surprised me, you guys, because as you might know, Sellwood, East Moreland, that whole area is so hot. Many people love it, got so much going for it, especially for a city within the Portland metro area. But this too is an area showing cooling. Interesting, right? I find this interesting. West and East Moreland, the Sellwood area, it has a lot to offer people in the way of walkability, restaurants, cute old bungalow, or you can do East Moreland, which is a gorgeous kind of beaver cleaver, area just outside of Sellwood. The median list price in that area is $647, which is pretty good. But I will tell you, if you're looking in the Sellwood area, a lot of times people have to look higher in price point to get something a little more robust. But again, for being an inner, close in and having a lot going for it, these are pretty good average median prices. The median price of new listings is sitting at $619.9. The average days on market is 80 and the median is 35. So again, it's telling you that for homes that are sitting for a long time, it's taking about 80 days. For homes that are, coming on market, it's taking right around 35, not too shabby. And then the average price decreases that have happened in the last week is sitting right around 35%. So, not terrible. We've seen much higher in some of the areas that we're talking about, but the market action is sitting at 26. And it's saying that it has a slight buyer's advantage. Things have been cooling off over the past few weeks and prices have not yet stopped falling. So why is that? I'm not really sure. I don't know what specifically would be causing that because that area is red hot in most cases. But again, we're kind of seeing some trending happen as I'm reading through the reports. We're seeing a pattern of hot areas like Lake Oswego, Sellwood, cooling, and areas that typically not as red hot starting to just balance out. Again, I look at affordability as a big reason for that. People can get a lot more for their money, or they start to see prices falling and they kind of set back, or they go to places where they know they can get more bang for their buck. It always happens that way. When we meet with buyers, we always try to tell them what they can get for the money in the areas they're hoping to be in. And inevitably, it seems to happen where buyers will tend to look in other places. They'll go, gosh, I can get such a bigger house. I can get the shop I want. I can get, walkability and all these other areas without paying the premium. And if you are thinking about making a move, just want to do a shameless plug, we love to get the reach outs. Our phone number's on the screen. You're welcome to call, text, or just reach out to us. We'll set up a time to kind of cover what's important to you. But just know that this just goes to show you that it's very interesting to look at the data and try to interpret what is happening within Portland. There are some areas that are starting to show a buyer's advantage that have been notoriously a hot seller's market, where we'd normally tell you and counsel you to say, gosh, be ready in those areas. So if any of these areas that we don't cover today that you have questions on, do reach out to us because we can walk you through what's specifically happening in those areas. But this one to me is a little bit of a surprise. I'm not totally surprised by Lake Oswego's data, but I am surprised about Sellwood area just because it's just very beloved, always seems to be red hot. But let's take another look at another area in the east side and compare that. All right, the next area of town is Northeast Portland, specifically that Alameda area. Again, this is on the east side, so when you compare it to Sellwood, we just looked at the numbers for Sellwood. It's cooling off. Now we're heading into Northeast Portland. Always feels like it's red hot in Northeast Portland. And Alameda is a gorgeous neighborhood. It is a picture perfect era, older bungalows, parks, walkability, all that stuff. And when you look at the numbers, it says it's a strong seller's market. And you know what? We believe it, because when we show properties in that area, we've actually got a buyer in town this week that's looking, and there's multiple offers happening in those areas. So isn't it interesting to see just like the different areas around Portland that are, some are notoriously always red hot, but Northeast Portland, to me, I always feel like people really gravitate to the area. There's a lot of neighborhoods actually in Northeast Portland that are to really appreciate. But the median list price in Northeast Portland is $800,000. The median price of new listings is $589,900. There's actually quite a cadre of prices in Northeast Portland. When you look just directly at a place like Alameda, you're gonna see high prices. People wanna be in Alameda Ridge, Alameda, like kind of that area. But as you move past some of those central areas of Alameda, you're gonna look at neighborhoods that are on the outskirts of it where you can actually get a cute house, but it's not gonna be directly in the center of Alameda. You know, a lot of homes in Alameda, you're gonna pay over $1 million for those properties. But if you're just outside that area in a smaller home, you can see home prices be in the 5s and 6s. So it does have a lot of variance in prices. The median days on market's 35 and the average days on market's 79. Again, that's in alignment with a lot of the other areas that we've been talking about today. So how many price reductions have happened in the last week in this area? Not very many if you compare it to the areas we've talked about. It's only 33%. So they're not having to drop their price that much in that specific zip code in order to get a sale happening. It's saying the market action is sitting at 70, and that is a very strong seller's market. And you can see on the little dial here, if you are a buyer looking in that area, be prepared that it is not the same market as some of the other areas we've talked about where it's cooling. This area is still moving at a fast clip. Now, something I want to share with you about some of these classic inner city areas, with the exception of Sellwood, because it's doing its own thing right now. But understand that when you're looking at some of these really classic inner city neighborhoods, Laurelhurst, Alameda, Sellwood, Irvington, these areas you cannot build in. They are already built out. The houses we have in those areas are the houses you have. So there's always the group of people that want to live in these really classic neighborhoods, and they're really special. And so they tend to hold their value pretty well. They always seem to be in their own market. So just be aware if you are looking in Portland and moving and you want to be in some of those older neighborhoods with lots of charm, they tend to have their own market within the market, meaning whatever's going on in Portland or other parts of the country doesn't matter. Those areas always have a demand of their own. So just a heads up on that. If you are looking into certain specific neighborhoods in Portland, reach out to us so we can tell you what's specifically happening in those areas. But as we can see, 97212, which is Northeast Alameda Range area, it has its own seller's market happening. Okay, the last neighborhood or area I'm gonna cover today is on the west side, and it is Tigard. We've done videos on Tigard. It's a great place. It's just past Southwest Portland. Tigard is showing a slight buyer's advantage. So you can see that the median list price is at $772. The median price of new listings is sitting at $662. The average median days on market is 63, with the average days on market around 140. Let's talk about this, because this is the highest average days on market we've seen so far in talking today about areas. Why is that? I will tell you what I think. Right now, Tigard is experiencing a lot of growth. We've done videos on River Terrace. We've talked about new developments like Kingston Terrace. There's gonna be a lot of new construction here. Whenever you have a lot of new construction, the resale inventory has to compete with it. And so a lot of times you see there's that competition that happens where new construction, they'll offer things like buy downs and closing cost payments that are hard to compete when you're a resale property. Secondly is sometimes the new construction comes on the market before it's ever built. And by the time it's built and sold, it has a very long shelf life on the market. So it skews the data points. So you'll a lot of times see like a rendering and they'll have a lot for sale. It says, hey, we're gonna build this house, and it's a rendering. And by the time the buyer shows up and says, okay, I'll buy that, then it takes, time and all that. But a lot of times builders don't sell their inventory until they start building it. Buyers just don't have a visual for it. And so a lot of times it takes until they get it kind of pre-built to sell it. Also, we've just had a lot of inventory sitting in Tigard for a period of time. There was a lot of big push, and the average sales price is getting quite high over there. And so what happens is that higher price point I talked about earlier, where $750 and above starts to sit. There's a lot of lingering inventory in Tigard, well over 800,000. I've seen it. 800, 850, 900, actually 850 is the marker point because I did some comps for a client recently, and we've actually been selling inventory above 850 in Tigard. There is quite a bit of inventory and it's just sitting, and it's starting to have that downward pressure on pricing. So not entirely surprised by Tigard's numbers, but it's very interesting to see that the average days on market's the highest we've seen today. And the price decreases in the last week have been at 47%, which is almost 50. It's one of the higher ones we've seen. This is telling me what I think I've already seen in the field, which is that we are at a slight buyer's edge. Now, things in Tigard in the 500s, the 600s are moving. I can share with you that we've been selling inventory in that price point. We actually have multiple offers happening right now on a property in the 500s at the time we're doing this video. So those price points are always going to move kind of quickly, but most of Tigard's inventory is sitting in the 6, 7s and above. So these numbers make sense to me. So just be aware, if you are looking in the Tigard area, this is the numbers you can sort of rely on. So those are the extent of the neighborhoods I'm going to go over today. If you are making a move to Portland and you want to analyze certain locations or neighborhoods, or maybe you're selling your house or thinking about selling, and you just kind of want to know what is happening specifically, I can pull numbers and more detailed data for you that'll really tell you what's happening. Because again, we're talking kind of general, and the data points go from 0 to however high they go to, and certain types of houses can sell quicker or not, and certain market conditions are playing into those areas. So just know it is very, very microeconomics versus the macroeconomics we've been talking about per area. If you're thinking about buying or selling in the Portland area, pricing strategy and timing matter more than ever. Reach out to us, text us, or call us at the number below because we can guide you through your specific situation. And if you're looking for more information about living in Portland, stick around because we have more videos coming your way.